Now this was a movie that I was really skeptical about, and I think a lot of other people were as well. It was either going to be hit or miss. It was either going to be a really good movie, one of the best of the year, or it was going to be a flat-out failure. And it all depended on how the kind of company and how their director and their actors handled the movie. And I think the movie itself was actually pretty good. In fact, it was very good, better than I expected. And I was one of the people who was skeptical about how the movie was going to turn out. But to tell you the truth, it exceeded expectations by a lot. Like, it's one of my favourite movies of all time now, and it's even better than the previous kind of Marvel movies. So like Avengers, I wasn't a fan of Avengers, and I know that's like kind of a sin to say. Like, nobody says that, but this one was actually pretty good. It felt like what the prequels to Star Wars should have been in an essence. Like, Star Wars prequels tried to be comedic, tried to have this kind of layer of comedy to it with Jar Jar Binks, but as you probably know, Jar Jar Binks is a bit of a bastard. Nobody likes Jar Jar Binks, right? But if they had handled comedy in the way that this did, then it would have been much better. It would have got a lot more praise, and it wouldn't have been discussed in prequels. You know what I mean? It's like Jar Jar was their attempt at comedy, and that was because they tried to be child friendly. They tried to appeal to the kind of demographics. Like, they wanted a widespread appeal. But this movie wasn't afraid to kind of go for the more adult audience with humour. I mean, it did have kind of child jokes and shit like that. I mean, of course it would. It's not going to be centered directly at adults, but I mean, like, it had adult jokes. It had like more mature themes almost, and it's probably one of the more risky Marvel movies in terms of that factor, in terms of how it kind of risked so many things, like the comedy, like kind of risky jokes, the kind of setting, almost space isn't really shown a lot in Marvel movies, at least to my knowledge. So yeah, it was a big risk on their part, but I think because it was a risk, because it was so unconventional compared to other Marvel movies, it's partly to do with why it was so successful and why it was so good. Like, Marvel movies normally are probably like 75% action, and then like the rest is comedy, you know? So it's, the majority of it is kind of action and kind of like explosions. And that's not a bad thing, I'm not knocking the movie. But this one did the opposite. This one was mainly comedy with a hint of action, I think. And because of that kind of new mix, because it kind of turned the formula on its head, it made for a more interesting movie, and it made for a kind of more enjoyable movie. Another reason it was so successful and so why it was so good is because it is a sci-fi movie, but it's a fun sci-fi movie. And a lot of sci-fi movies that have been made recently, like the late 80s, 90s, 2000s onwards, a lot of the sci-fi movies have been depressing, been dystopian, so like Blade Runner, Alien, stuff like that, even Prometheus to an extent. Like, they've all been very kind of depressing, dystopian, kind of focusing on the negative, focusing on like kind of mysteries of space, and how it's kind of dangerous, how like nobody can hear you scream. But this one kind of focused on like everybody can hear you laugh in space. So like, sort of like Galaxy Quest in a sense. Galaxy Quest was a film which kind of made fun of Star Trek, kind of made fun of the kind of ideas it showed, the kind of cliches, the actors themselves. And although this wasn't a direct kind of piss take of Star Wars, it sort of indirectly was. You had like Chris Pratt's character, he was like Han Solo in a modern kind of environment, in a modern kind of cinematic movie. If Han Solo had his own movie, and they were allowed to be a bit more kind of free with the comedy, then this is what it would be basically. And that's why it's so good, because it kind of recaptured the kind of Galaxy Quest era of sci-fi. So when everything's depressing kind of sci-fi movies like that, as I said, Blade Runner, Alien, and just, I can't think of any examples off the top of my head apart from those two, but like there is a lot of sci-fi that is kind of focused on the morbid. This harkened back to the olden days, where sci-fi was fun, where like Star Wars, although it wasn't kind of comedic, the original trilogy was focused on it being enjoyable. There was no kind of heavy kind of deaths. There was no kind of emotional trauma you get from it, you know? It was just a fun movie to watch. And this is a fun movie to watch. It's not too kind of emotionally draining. it's not just not too kind of depressing. You come out of this and you feel like better for it. Whereas with a lot of movies in cinema, you go in and when you come out you feel worse than you did when you went in. You feel worse than you did coming out than when you went in because the movie just puts you in a bad mood. There's a lot of bad shit happening. But with this, they have people acknowledging the kind of comments that people make, and it's a minor thing, and it's something you might think like, how does that make a difference? But it kind of does. It makes it feel like no matter what they're saying, it's important, you know? So yeah, the comedy aspect is probably one of the best aspects, and probably the main reason, if not one of the main reasons this movie did so well and was so good, because it kind of harkened back to those olden days of kind of movies and sci-fi that was just for fun, you know? And it's not to say that there was no danger in the movie, it's not to say that the characters didn't have any kind of loss. They did have loss, but it equaled out emotions. So again, you came out feeling happier than you did when you went in. Like, this is hypothetical. It's not a spoiler, it's just something off the top of my head. Imagine a character died, but they died in a funny way. It's a similar kind of thing that happens here, like kind of the balance out the bad with a hint of good. So like, it's not too overbearing, it's not too kind of happy-go-lucky and fairy tale-esque, but at the same time it's not kind of morbid. It does it's kind of a good balance and a good mixture of both those aspects. One of the main parts of the movie itself actually was the soundtrack, and the protagonist, played by Pratt, has a cassette tape called Awesome Mix, and that's actually the official soundtrack. The official soundtrack is an item which the main character uses, and I thought that was a pretty good way of kind of marketing the item and marketing the soundtrack, because the soundtrack was in the movie and it was a key part of the kind of narrative. So you would have the cassette tape and it would be like a kind of sentimental thing for him, and the fact that the soundtrack is that is just, it's a good kind of bonus, a good way of doing that I thought. And the music is from the 80s. Starkiller, this isn't a spoiler, this is like the first 2 seconds of the movie. Starkiller's from the 80s, and he gets put on, like, put in space. And that's kind of that's how it starts. I mean, that's in the kind of blurb of the movie. If you go on the cinema kind of bookings, it'll tell you the kind of synopsis, and that's the synopsis that he comes from the 80s and is abducted. I won't say anything else apart from that, but they integrated the 80s with the sci-fi, which I thought was another good aspect. So if you've ever played the Fallout games, Fallout is in the future, but it's a 1940s/50s idea of the future. So although there is kind of robots and mutants and aliens in Fallout, they still have like Nat King Cole or like Dean Martin playing in the background in cassettes, you know? So it kind of, it's sci-fi mixed in with the 80s genre. That's what this is. Similar to like Fallout is sci-fi, but with the kind of 40s, 50s flair. And that's a good way of kind of setting it apart from different movies. So like, if this was just a straight sci-fi movie, if this was just a sci-fi movie in year 3000, it would lose its charm. Part of its charm came from the fact that it kind of mixed the 80s with the sci-fi and made for this kind of cheesy movie that was aware of itself. It was a cheesy movie, and you can't deny that. But the fact that it kind of acknowledged that and made use of that meant that it was better for it. It meant that it was more enjoyable. The fact that it was stupid, and it didn't care. And I mentioned Star Wars before, and this movie did feel like it was kind of Marvel's answer to Star Wars. It had a lot of the aspects, it had a lot of the kind of things that made Star Wars good. And I'm going to get a lot of hate for saying this. I think it exceeded Star Wars in a lot of ways. And I mentioned Galaxy Quest before. Now Galaxy Quest has this line in it where he says like, there's a guy who's an extra, and he says, I don't want to die. I'm an extra, I always die. And then the guy who's played by Alan Rickman says, you're not the extra, you're the plucky comic relief. And then that became a sort of archetype in movies. Plucky comic relief was the actual thing after that, and probably before that as well, but it was only acknowledged after that. And this movie has plucky comic relief, but it's not just one character who's plucky. They're all plucky comic relief, and you might think that might be a bit overpowering, but because they're all kind of different brands of humour, it's sort of intertwined in this weird kind of thing where it works. So like Chris Pratt's character, Starkiller, has kind of one-liners and has kind of Tony Stark personality, and then you have Rocket Raccoon, who's more cynical, has one-liners, but it's kind of making fun of people, you know? So it's kind of darker humour, like everybody's gonna die kind of thing. Then you have Groot, who's more kind of slapstick humour. You have Batista's character, Drax or Drex, who is actually pretty humorless. Who has this weird kind of Asperger's personality, where he doesn't understand comedy, or doesn't understand sarcasm. And that has a kind of comedic aspect. And then you have this green woman, Gamora, and she has a few lines, but what I'm saying is like they all have different kind of personalities that equal out. One thing that I should mention, I mentioned it a bit when I was talking about Rocket Raccoon and Groot, is the CGI. The CGI used is actually really, really good. And you probably expect that from a Marvel movie, from a movie that kind of is expected to gross so much. But yeah, the movie's CGI and kind of graphics that are used could be compared to like Avatar. I thought the stuff that was used was breathtaking, and it really helped kind of immerse you in the worlds that were shown. Like, I don't know the worlds that are shown off by heart. There's a city world kind of thing. There's a kind of smoky, ominous world, and yeah, the CGI just helps realise the kind of places that have been created by Marvel, and I thought that deserved a mention because it's very nice aesthetically. The Rocket Raccoon and Groot bromance relationship type thing could be compared to Han Solo and Chewbacca. Groot would be Chewbacca and Han Solo would be Rocket Raccoon, and they really do steal the show. They are the best characters in the film, and yeah, that's despite the fact that they are, as I said before, kind of CGI kind of effects, basically. And despite the fact that Groot only has 3 words he can say, I am Groot, he still manages to be a likeable character. He still manages to have some emotion, because he's sort of like Hodor. Hodor can only say Hodor, but he says Hodor in different ways, so the actor still has a chance to act. I would say that this has a lot of comedic realism, and that's the thing I just made up off the top of my head, so you can use that if you want. Comedic realism, the thing now. So like, we'll be doing a slow motion walk, sort of like a convention in action movies and sci-fi movies, or movies in general, is that like, they'll do a slow motion walk to show that they're badass, right? But in a normal movie they would do it, you know, to you over, and you'd be like, oh, they're pretty cool. In this, do a slow motion walk, but halfway through the walk, someone would sneeze, and then halfway through someone would yawn, and it's just like, things like that, so like, stuff like that is present in the movie, and again, I don't want to spoil specific scenes, because it'll spoil the joke, but stuff like that is handled pretty well in the movie. They acknowledge when something's unrealistic, so it kind of breaks the fourth wall sometimes, which is good as well. In terms of characters, the best characters were probably Rocket Raccoon and Starkiller. The best pairing, probably Rocket Raccoon and Groot, the bromance, and the kind of relationship that they have. It's sort of like the case where Rocket's the brains and Groot's the brawn, and that's the kind of pairing that happens a lot in movies, but it works specifically well. But it works especially well in this case, for whatever reason. I think it's just the chemistry between the actors, or the chemistry that's created by the FX guys. Because the FX on Rocket Raccoon and Groot is pretty damn good. Like, although there's a voice actor behind them, you don't think that. You don't think it's Vin Diesel and Bradley Cooper. You think it's Rocket Raccoon and Groot. Like, even without the actors being there, the actors act better than a lot of actors normally do, you know. They act a lot better without their faces shown than most actors can with their faces shown alive, you know what I mean? So it's kudos to them for doing so well under those kind of circumstances. Another character who's really good is the character of Yondu, and Yondu is a kind of scavenger type bounty hunter kind of deal, and he's played by the guy who's in The Walking Dead. I can't remember his name, but I'll put it in an annotation. And I thought he was a really good character. He's underrated, like nobody mentions him, But I thought that the guy who played him did a really good job. And he was basically playing Merle from The Walking Dead, but in blue paint. But it worked. Because Merle is kind of the bounty hunter persona. You know? So it worked that he was kind of typecast. That worked to his advantage, because the character needed to be that kind of thing. And the opening is the best opening ever made. Period. The opening alone deserves a fucking Emmy or something. It was just the best experience ever made. The soundtrack could be compared to like Pulp Fiction, because it's so memorable. It's the music that's used fits in with the movie. Like, you might not think, how the hell did 80s Pet Shop Boys fit with sci-fi? But somehow the fact that it's used at these certain intervals makes it fit in with the flavour of the movie. And the fact that sometimes it doesn't fit in adds to the idea of comedy. This kind of contrast is part of the kind of charm. If I had one complaint about the movie, it's just that the characters that were good weren't used enough. So, Yondu deserved more screen time. I understand that it would have been a bit more difficult, because you couldn't just show Yondu having a merry old time when Starkiller was just fucking about on the other side of the universe. It wouldn't make sense. Why would you show Yondu having a cup of tea when Starkiller's shooting up the galaxy? It would be stupid. But I just thought, like, if they could have had more time to Yondu, it would have been good. Maybe in the extended edition they can. Another character who wasn't really kind of shown a lot was Thanos. Thanos is kind of the boss of this place, but he sends his henchman out, or henchman out, called Ronan, but you're still in the back of your mind thinking, isn't Thanos the main guy? So it's sort of like in The Phantom Menace, you have Darth Maul, but you know that the Emperor is the main guy. You know the Emperor is who they have to go after. And I didn't read the comics, so I had no idea, like, of Thanos being the main guy. But even though that was the case, I found it out pretty soon. So even if you haven't heard of these guys before, even if you're not familiar with the world, you'll know from the start that Thanos is the guy that they need to go after eventually. And you'll be thinking, like, why are they going after? But apart from that, the movie was great. It's one of the best movies. Definitely in the top 5. Almost as good as Blade Runner, it just doesn't topple it yet. But yeah, it's surprising, because I was skeptical. I knew it was either going to be a great movie or a bad movie, but surprisingly it was a great movie. And it did everything it tried to do really well. And I don't do this often, but I'll give it 9 out of 10. It was almost perfect. I don't want to give it 10 out of 10, because it did have some bad aspects that I mentioned before, even if they were good in a way. Good aspects that weren't used enough. 9 out of 10. Definitely the best movie in the past, like, 5 years, for sure. Best sci-fi movie, at least. There you go.